Good afternoon, YouTube friends. Thanks so much for coming by and welcome to another episode of The Untamed Olive. Today we are getting a leg up on our holiday recipes here. We are turning these very simple ingredients into a beautiful and delicious savory seitan roast. So keep on watching to see how to make it. You're going to love it. Okay guys, the main ingredient in our seitan roast is this Vital Wheat gluten flour. It actually has 21 grams of protein per serving, which is pretty incredible. Obviously it's not gluten-free. I do find that if I eat this type of gluten though sparingly, I do okay. So it obviously depends on what works for you. I've got 2 cups of that, a half a cup of nutritional yeast, and a bunch of different seasonings here. I've got sage, thyme, rosemary, onion powder, garlic powder, pepper, salt. I will obviously leave all the ingredients and the amounts that I use in the description box below per usual. So I'm just going to whisk these dry ingredients all together and then we're going to set them aside while we mix our wet ingredients. And for those we have some pinto beans. I've got a 3/4 of a cup here, a few tablespoons of olive oil, and a few tablespoons of soy sauce here. I've also got a 1.5 cups of veggie broth. I just took a veggie bouillon cube and dissolved it in a 1.5 cups of water. So I'm dumping that in here. And then 1 small white onion chopped and 4 cloves. Obviously, I'll still type that below. Of garlic, really roughly chopped. You can throw this in a food processor, or I find that this is liquidy enough that I can just blend it on up in my blender. So I'm going to just pulse it a little bit and then blend it until it's one homogenized liquid. Now we're just going to add our wet ingredients to our dry and mix it up into a dough. And then we're going to knead that dough for about 5 minutes or until it becomes a bit springy. You'll notice that the dough gets a bit spongy right away. It's very kind of interesting. This Vital Wheat gluten is very interesting. So I'm just mixing it on up here, and I'm going to mix it until it forms a dough, and then I'll get in there with my hands and knead it until it is all combined and, like I said, kind of bounces back a little bit. You'll see in this video in just a moment. Okay, now that we've got a nice and springy dough here, I'm dumping it onto a piece of parchment paper, and I'm just going to form it into a loaf-ish shape. That is a technical baking term. So once we've got it all put together and in the shape that we like, I'm going to roll it in the parchment paper. Then I'm going to lay it seam down on a piece of foil and wrap it in the foil pretty much like a giant ass burrito. Alrighty, we have got ourselves a giant burrito looking thing. We're going to throw this roast in a 350-degree oven for 120 minutes, and every 20 minutes I am going to flip the roast until it's done. And while our roast is cooking, we're going to get started on a super simple mushroom gravy. And really, what's a holiday roast without some really awesome gravy, right? So this is really easy. I'm just going to add 1 tablespoon of olive oil and 1 heaping tablespoon of vegan butter to a medium-high heated saucepan here. Then I'm going to toss in 1 small white onion and 2 cloves of garlic that I've chopped up, and I'm going to saute those until they're nice and soft and just starting to get a little bit of color. Okay, we've been sauteing for about 4 minutes. We've got a little bit of color going on. They're nice and soft. Now we're going to add some chopped mushrooms. I've got about 4 ounces of button mushrooms that I've cut into about 1/6, and I'm going to add those in and cook them until they reduce to about half their size. We want a nice chunky gravy here, so this is going to give us some really good texture. Okay, now that our mushrooms have cooked down and our onions have cooked down even more, we're going to add 2 tablespoons of cornstarch. That's what's going to bind and thicken our gravy. So I'm just dumping that on in here, and I'm going to stir it up and let it cook for just a bit so we get that raw cornstarch flavor out of there. See how it kind of forms a dough? That's exactly what we're looking for. I know it looks a little weird, but we're on the right track if it's looking kind of like this. And once we're mixed and cooking a bit, I'm going to add a whole bunch more seasoning. Very similar flavors to what we added to our seitan roast. I'm going to be adding some thyme, rosemary. I'm also adding some roasted red pepper flakes here and some white pepper, onion powder, and garlic powder. You can use regular black pepper. I actually just ran out of black pepper and realized I had white pepper, which is actually a really good ingredient for gravy. It's a little bit more mild tasting. It really lends itself to that sage and thyme flavor. So whichever you got in your pantry will work just great. Didn't mean to go on that long about pepper. So we're just mixing this together, and we're going to slowly, half cup by half cup, add some non-dairy milk until we get the desired consistency that we'd like for our gravy. Keep in mind it will continue to thicken as it cooks, so I would start with something a little bit more runny than not. There we have it. This gravy is so good, not just on roast, it's super good on potatoes. It's a perfect side item for your Thanksgiving meal. Right now I'm just taking a little taste test. Gonna add maybe some more salt and pepper to taste. This is where you do you and do what tastes fabulous to you. I've also sauteed some mushrooms for garnish. And I have pulled our roast out of the oven and let it sit for a good 10 minutes to let it firm up a little bit. It tends to be a little bit wiggly for a while. So I am unwrapping this here. Isn't it beautiful? It's got a nice, beautiful crust on it. And I'm just going to transfer this to our platter. Okay, now that we've plattered our roast, we're just going to slice it on up and add our beautiful toppings. If you find that your roast is a little bit squishy like this, you can always throw it back in the oven. I actually threw it in the oven right on this platter. I had sliced off the edge and it was a little bit wet, so I just tossed it back in the oven at 300 for about 15 more minutes. It dried it out just enough to be able to slice really nicely. You could also throw it in the fridge. The longer this sits, the more dense and meat-like it's going to be. So I'm just slicing it on up here. The really awesome thing about this recipe too is you can make it way ahead of time. So whether you want it to be like your meat substitute for the whole meal, or you just want an option for your vegan and vegetarian friends, you can make this like a week in advance, and it's just going to get better and better textured in the fridge, and you don't have to worry about it during the craziness of the holidays. So that is a fabulous thing about this recipe. Once we've got it sliced and fanned out, I am going to add our mushroom gravy that we made, sauteed mushrooms, a bit of walnuts. You can also use pecans, whatever you prefer. And then to brighten everything up and give it a nice sweet crunch, I'm going to add some pomegranate kernels. They make everything so beautiful and festive, so I thought, why not? Plus the flavors go fabulously together. And there you have it, folks. We have got a beautiful, savory, delicious seitan roast. It's full of protein. It's a sure win for all your guests, whether it's a side item or the main dish. And it's something you can feel good about eating, because y'all know we're going to be eating some sweets and some carbs as well. I can go to town on those mashed potatoes. So this is a really nice option to have so you feel good about what you're eating. Thank you so much for watching. Feel free to share this recipe out, like, subscribe, tell your friends. I hope that you're having a wonderful beginning to your holiday season. Cheers.